Hello, welcome to Photography 101. We've been looking at the exposure triangle. If you want to know all about aperture, then go and check that video out. I'll tag it up here and in the description downstairs, in the description down the bottom of the video. And today we are going to be looking at shutter speed. Now, shutter speed is quite interesting. It has two different uses, as does aperture. And we're going to do two experiments today so that we can have a look at both of those, just like we did with aperture. For these two experiments, I'm going to take it outside, but if you want to do it at home, then you could easily do that too. So I'll talk you through that as we go through. So aperture looks at the size of the lens. Shutter speed is all about how quickly the shutter opens and shuts, and that's because the light comes in through the lens and it transfers onto the plate in the back. So if you look at the old style cameras that do the sort of glass print or film, it's imprinting that image onto the film and the glass plate, and it's the same with a digital camera today. It's just doing that on in a digital format, and it's picking it up on light sensors in the back. So how fast that shutter speed lifts and then shuts again is what's important for shutter speed. So there's two things that shutter speed impacts. That's the amount of light you get into your image. Obviously, the longer it's open, the more light you'll get in, then the quicker it's open. The second thing it impacts is motion blur in your image. So if you've got a really quick shutter speed, you're going to capture exactly what's in front of you in that moment, and it's going to be a really clear, crisp image. Whereas if you have a long shutter speed and there's something in your image moving, then when you close the shutter, all of the movement that's happened in the time that shutter's been open will be captured in that image. And that can make for some really interesting results, and people use it a lot. And for me, shutter speed is kind of the most important thing that I look at. I know a lot of people, aperture is the most important. For me, it's all about the shutter speed. So if you're looking at water, for example, if you do a very quick shutter speed, you'll capture the moment of that water, and you'll see all the ripples and all of the movements in the water. If you make that shutter speed longer, you start to blur the definition in the image and see more motion. So you might see people taking pictures of bikes moving through a scene and there's a bit of a blur. Or you can use it for something called light painting, where you can have the shutter open for a really long time and move a light around to create shapes and images. So there's some really cool artistic stuff you can do with shutter speed. So we're going to go off and do two experiments. One, we'll look at the amount of light that's coming into the image as you play around with your shutter speed, and the second is to look at that motion blur. So I better go and pack up my camera kit. Might need a change of clothes, and I'm going to drive to Winchford, and I will see you there. I've realised I'm stood right next to the water and it's really noisy, so hopefully you can hear me. We're going to start our first experiment, which is going to be looking at how shutter speed affects the images. So we're going to just have to change a few settings on our camera to start with, and then we'll take a few pictures. So let's get cracking. For this experiment then, whether you're doing it at home or you've gone out and about, it's a good idea to have your camera set up either I've got a tripod today or on a hard surface. You're going to end up with your shutter speed being quite a long period of time, and if your camera is shaking as you're hand holding it, then that will affect the image and the entire image will be blurry rather than just the water. So having your camera set up on a sturdy surface will be really useful for this test. So I'm going to start off by just changing my camera to shutter speed priority. For me with a Nikon, that's an S. If you have a Canon, that may be a T. It may be different on other cameras, so worth checking your camera manual just to see which setting you should choose. Now with my camera in shutter priority, this allows me to change my shutter speed, which is this number here, and my camera, as you can see it's doing at the moment, will automatically change the aperture and the ISO depending on the light levels to try and get a clear image. So that means all we're going to be changing is our shutter speed. So I'm going to start off with quite the first shutter speed of 1/200. I'm not quite sure why it's saying the subject is too dark, but we'll give that a go and we'll see what that does. So we can see the water really clearly in this image. The background is sharp, the water is sharp, everything is very immediate. So let's try changing our shutter speed. I'm going to lower it quite a bit, down to 1/60th of a second, and we'll see what that does. So we're starting to see a bit of softness in the water, which is what we're looking for. But we'll drop it down again and see how much softer the water we can get. Let's go down to 1/10 of a second. Yeah, so we're really starting to see some motion in the water there. You can really see it sort of smoothing out. I'll show you the picture full screen. You can really see the softness of the water as it's capturing more movement because the shutter is open for longer. Let's go down to a full second, why not? And see what that does. Yeah, so it is struggling with the light levels, but as you can see the water, I can sort of change that in editing. The water is much, much softer. It looks really smooth. So this is how you get that effect with changing your shutter speeds. And you can do this on all sorts of different things, not just water. So you'll have seen it telling me that my settings are too bright because I've got my shutter speed down to 1 second. You can get darkness filters to put on the lens of the camera. That will darken everything down, and that means that you can have your shutter speed open for longer, so you can get more of that soft, smooth effect. But it's a good experiment just to play around and see what images you can take with your camera, specifically with your shutter speed. So obviously I'm doing it here with water, but you could also try animals or, well, all sorts of things, anything that moves basically. There's a technique called panning where if say you've got a motorbike coming past, you can take the picture, you have to move at the exact same speed as the motorbike, and so you'll get the motorbike clear, sharp, and then the background will be blurry so that you can see that movement. There's a real technique to that. I've tried it with aircraft and it is very, very difficult. So that is experiment number 1. So for experiment number 2, we're going to look at how shutter speed affects the brightness levels. So we're going to start off with our camera still in shutter speed priority so that we can steal some numbers from there, and then we're going to change it to manual. So let's go and do that. Okay, so I still have my camera in shutter priority, and I've got my shutter speed just set to 1/30th of a second. That's telling my camera to put the aperture at f8 or 9 as it's changing its mind, but we'll go with f8 and at ISO 100. So we're going to remember those f8 and ISO 100 numbers. I'm going to change my camera to the manual setting, and fortunately for me it's remembered my settings and saved them as that, so that's really useful. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to change my shutter speed to be quite high, quite short, high number, short speed, so 1/800th of a second, and we're keeping it at f8 and ISO 100. And let's take that picture. As you can see, it's black. It's very, very, very dark. So let's change the shutter speed down to 1/320th of a second and take that picture. So it's a very dark image. You can still see roughly what's going on, but the image is very, very dark and not what we're after. So let's change the shutter speed down again. Let's go to 1/125th of a second. As you can see, the image is getting much brighter because it's open for much longer, it's letting more light in. And we can keep going and it'll just keep getting brighter and brighter. As you see, it's starting to blow out the highlights there, so they're so white that if I try editing the image, which I'm not for what I'm showing you, but if I tried to edit the image, I wouldn't be able to get any of the detail back in the whites here. And we can go really crazy, go down to 1.6 seconds. And the image is almost completely whited out. So that should show you how your shutter speed is affecting the brightness levels of your image. I hope that was a useful demonstration on how to use shutter speed on your camera. You can do it on your phone as well if you can find the settings to tweak your aperture, shutter speed and ISO. Shutter speed is really the one I love because it makes such a difference to the images that you take. I know that aperture does as well, but I find on my camera shutter speed is the one that has the biggest difference, and it's the one that I play around with the most. So it's definitely worth trying out those two experiments and giving it a go. So we've looked at how it changes movement in your images and how it captures different levels of brightness depending on how long that shutter is open for. So thanks for joining me. We'll move on to ISO in our next video, so keep an eye out for that one, and if you haven't already checked it out, then go back and watch that aperture video. I will link it at the end of this. So thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Bye!